How long have we known each other?
Let's see. It was men's theology. Was it 3 semesters ago? So, what, a year and a half?
So I joined.
Because BLT's been 3 sessions.
BLT.
Back left table.
Oh, I'm so hungry this morning that I'm just thinking of.
We'll go pick up Chick-fil-A after this.
Ooh, that's a great idea.
Not sponsored.
Not sponsored. Shout out Chick-fil-A and Apopka. No, I think it's been.
New location is running great.
It's probably been 3+ semesters. I joined Grace August of 24. Yeah. So last August would have been a year.
So that makes sense. So your first semester would have been spring of 25.
No, I did the fall. I just didn't sit at the back left table. I sat at a random table.
So we met
week.
in that spring then.
Yeah. So it's been a year.
So about a year.
Yeah.
Feels like 3.
Yeah. So,
Specifically 3.
Jimmy, what do you do for work, man?
So I'm in charge of operations for H&H Products. So how I translate that is everything that goes on within our business related to manufacturing or supply chain, most of which is underneath me, and my job is to make sure my team has the resources to be successful. I am fully making sure that I am giving resources and capabilities to our teams to continue to excel and improve in our business.
Did you go to school for this?
Kind of, yeah. So study business and accounting in school. My career didn't start off operations. My career started off in sales. Okay. So we got that little thing to share there.
In common there.
Yeah. We started in sales, sold for a forklift and warehouse equipment company. But what I ended up finding is that the products we were selling, I went into hundreds of different warehouse and manufacturing operations, and I approached sales as a solutions based. If I didn't solve a problem, I didn't want to make a sale. Ended up giving me a little bit of success in there for a couple of years, but that also allowed me to go into an operation, see an operation, and put on my thinking cap to improve their operation. And then little did I know that was the gap that we needed at the time that I was joining back at H&H Products. So that fit really well, because coming in on the surface, if you look at resume, I should have never been hired for the position I took on. Right.
Yeah.
But it ended up working out. So
now, what does the H&H stand for in H&H Products?
So this is funny. It stands for Hartley and Hartley, which makes sense. Family business. I'm the 3rd generation. So you have my grandfather, Len Hartley, who started the business currently, has been president since 2001, and then myself, Jimmy Hartley. And everyone would think the H&H would be, my grandfather and my father, right? It was actually my grandfather and his father was the H&H. So for a little while there, my grandfather had a background in bottling and in the industry as well. Needed some work, wanted to help his son, my grandfather, and he was his primary salesperson, so to say. I mean, a little bit of everything when you're a 2-man operation, but my granddad would go out on sales calls with his dad. So the H&H was the Hartley and Hartley of those two. So even though we're 3rd generation, I'm 3rd generation from founder, there's actually 4 generations of Hartleys that have worked in the business, right? I haven't put my son to work yet, so we'll get there.
Yeah.
Maybe when he turns 5. So H&H is the Hartley and Hartley. And there's a funny story behind that. Is one day there was some sort of Florida storm or something going on. So we have H&H Products independent letters on the building, and one of the H's falls off the building. And my dad, who's running the plant at the time, goes into my granddad's office. He's like, hey, you see that one of the H's is off the building. My granddad goes, well, you better go fix it. It's yours. He's like, what do you mean it's yours? He said, that's your H. He said, how do you know which one's yours? He's like, because mine's on the building.
Yeah. I own the building.
I own the building. I've determined that is now yours.
So I want to go back to the beginning, because I think the story with H&H that I think people would resonate with is, like, I feel a bit that you've been kind of groomed for this position, but you weren't, there's all the talk in the news over the last couple of years of, like, these Nepo babies, right? Have you heard this term? Like, you only got the job because of your parents.
Yeah.
But we'll get to why I think you're actually not one of those, because you weren't hired into the business.
I appreciate that.
But I want to start in the beginning because we're in a how many thousand square foot warehouse?
It's 36,000 square feet.
Okay, 36,000 square feet. Is this what $200 gets you?
This is what $200 can get you with a lot of work and overtime.
So, what's the $200 story?
So, $200 story. And it's funny, I was thinking about this last night when we were talking too. And the $200 story really is a $0 story, but the $200 sounds a little better.
Okay.
So my granddad, he realized that he did not work well for other people, and he realized that in order to excel at that time and period in the industry of what he wanted to do, he needed to do it on his own. He was too poor. He didn't have any money, $0 to start up. Went to the bank. Bank would not approve him anything. So he went to his
What year
parents.
is this?
This is probably around 1963. Business
Okay.
started in 1964. So he goes to his parents. Now, his parents were poor. And so he asked his parents for a loan, and they didn't have the money. But his parents were a little bit better off than he was. He was still living at home, still trying to make it work. He had just moved back to the Orlando area. So he went to his parents, and they went to the bank, and his parents had to co-sign on a loan for $200 for him to pretty much buy his first tank, ingredients, supplies. He had a background working in different bottling plants, bottling routes, manufacturing, a little bit of everything that was back in the day when every small town had their independent, RC Cola bottler, Coke bottler, Pepsi bottler. And so every town had these manufacturers. It isn't the massive distribution that's there today. So he had worked in many of those. So he knew enough to get by from just what he had collected over the years. So he bought ingredients. A guy at Pepsi had sold him a tank for $15, which even back then is ridiculous. Tanks today go for multi thousands of dollars, 5-figure type purchases at least. So we actually still have that tank because it's a stainless tank. It just never dies as long as you keep it clean. And so we actually still have that as one of our holding tanks in operation. It's kind of cool. So he gets his 50-gallon tank for $15, uses the rest for his ingredients, and he makes syrup. Makes syrup on his parents' side porch. And not nearly the food safety regulations.
That's where I was going to go next.
Things we have today, right? We no longer use side porches. We use back porches. No, I'm just kidding. So he mixed it on his parents' side porch, filled it in bottles, like kind of siphon filling type of operation, put it in his parents' station wagon. And this is back when your independent, restaurant franchises bought independently. So you could go to a McDonald's or a Wendy's or those guys and try to sell the restaurant. Obviously it doesn't work that way today. So yeah, he just flipped that enough times till he had a business.
What was the actual syrup for? Was it like a soda, or was it like?
Yeah, most of it. So back then, I'm not sure the very, very beginning, first production, what did it go towards? But a lot of times it went towards some sort of syrup product. The soda fountain that we know today really wasn't around until close to like the 80s and 90s is really when it became more common. But there was something called cup vending. So it would drop a cup. And you've probably seen this in like they may even still be like I think of them in TV shows and hospitals and things where it drops the cup and pours your coffee.
Yeah.
Basically that for sodas.
You see this in TV shows now where they're doing flashback to like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right, yeah. So, and sugar-based syrup can be used for a lot of different things, but restaurants usually it's used for beverage. And so I'm sure that was where it was going, and went around and sold it, made a little profit, went back and bought more ingredients, made a little profit, bought more ingredients, made a little profit, and in I think it was 1966, I believe he was able to afford rent on his first, wasn't a standalone property, it was a little like store side, actually near downtown Orlando. Still exists today. It's obviously something totally different now. Rented 1,200 square feet, grew it to 2,400 square feet, and then took the pool chemical company that was next door. He actually bought the company, ended up renting that space and turning it into H&H space, 3,600 square feet. And as he grew through the late 60s. So, yeah, kind of cool. Yeah.
And so in the beginning, that sugar-based syrup was the initial product. How many products do you guys actually put out
So
No.
I looked at this end of the year, so we're looking like end of year numbers, and we sold it was over 500 different types of items.
Wow.
Now, many of those could be, similar type flavors or formulations, right? We have probably a dozen or more strawberries in there, right?
Yeah.
Just different formulas, different types of ingredients that are in there.
Because in addition to this space that we're sitting in now, your actual production plant is down the road where you're
Correct.
producing all of these items.
Yeah, so our production plant is over near Maitland in the Lockhart area, kind of older area of Orlando, and we have 41,000 square feet over there. So that location was actually our first standalone building in 1971, built 5,000 square feet. If you want me to move around,
No,
I
you're
can turn
fine.
that on.
Just wave your arms. As long as all the lights don't turn off, we'll be good.
Oh my! I can't believe that worked. That's good. That's solid right there. I'll let the building company know.
Shout out to the building company.
So 1971 he built 5,000 square feet. And it's so funny when he built that 5,000 square feet. He actually said the words. He goes, "This is the last space I'll ever need." Because he thought he had it. He thought this was big business. You know, he's like, I started on my parents' side porch. Like this is such an interesting perspective that he had in just in his creation of the business versus what it is today.
So in the Hartley family lore, do you guys have do you remember what was the interest rate on that $200 loan? Like, do you guys no clue?
I don't know. I know. I'm sure there's some documents in a box somewhere that may tell more of a story. That'd be an interesting to find.
I'd be super curious on what that actually turned out to be, because obviously what you guys have built.
We've paid it off, by the way.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's just compound interest. It is what it is. It's just a wonderful thing. I think that as I've seen in my career in Central Florida, and I thought that my family had old roots here, right? Like people ask me if my family's from Florida, and I have a picture of my great grandfather sitting on the back of an alligator. Like that's about as
that's old Florida.
That's pretty
right there.
old Florida right
That's
there. But my grandfather wasn't starting a business, right? I mean, he had a bunch of side hustles, but they weren't anything legal. And we'll leave it at that. So, how does the original H&H, so great grandfather Hartley, when does your dad kind of come into the mix?
Sure. So my dad actually has a similar story to me coming in. So he came in, let's see, like any small family business, he was working there, middle school, high school, doing random things. And around the business, he's got all sorts of crazy, funny stories as a kid coming in and helping my granddad on the weekends, and just the random things you do when you're the son of an entrepreneur. And so he was always in the business, and I actually had a conversation with my aunt here around Thanksgiving last year, and I asked her, I was like, what was the relationship like with the siblings, and like around, my dad is the only sibling to come back into the business full time as a adult later in life, and I was like, what was that like? She said he always just wanted to be a part of it, just always was in him, almost like a calling.
Yeah.
And he kind of says the same thing. He's just like, I don't know. I just always was around it. I always was fascinated by it. I was interested by it. So he worked, let me see, he graduated college in, I believe it was 90. So he worked, in and out, throughout random times after school or whatever. Up until then, he came into the business officially in, I believe it was 1992 or 93. It was early 90s.
Okay.
Came into the business officially as plant manager, running some of the production. And then in 2001, I believe it was, he officially came over as president of the company.
So your grandfather ran the business for about 30 years, kind of not on his own, but he was the head of everything. When your dad came on as the president, did your grandfather just retire? Did he take a step back? Or I have a feeling that someone who starts working on the side porch doesn't stop working once.
Yeah, not exactly, right?
Yeah.
It's his baby,
Okay.
right? And that's the foundation of the entrepreneur, is that your business is your baby. Like, I've heard jokes around the family of like, granddaddy had 5 kids, right? He had his 4 human kids, and he had H&H. And just there's a certain sense of pride around that. So when the transition to my dad as president happened, it was during actually a pretty tumultuous time for the business. Just lost a major customer of theirs that was the majority of their sales. And my granddad came in. It was not a formal succession plan. It wasn't a written up, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to plan this over the next couple of years. It was like one day you're not, one day you are running the business. Now, my granddad, to answer your question, because it's his baby, he was always around. All the way up until, I remember he passed 2 summers ago. And I remember even like when he was going through the health stuff leading up to that, he was, he's getting reports and asking questions, and he called my dad from his hospital bed, like, what's going on this number that I'm seeing on the email? And it just, it was always, we learned to adjust to it because it was his baby and his love, right?
Yeah.
We had to serve him and honor him for the founder and foundation, even though it was as a business conversation type. It didn't make sense for him to be calling my dad over something that is something the production manager's handling, kind of thing. But that was his piece. And so he really didn't. My dad says he really didn't officially retire until probably another 10 years after that. And even then, he was still getting reports. He was still around. He would show up and walk through every now and then, and just, it was cool to see him later in life. Just really, I feel like the last couple years of his life, really loved seeing what the business became without him, and had a sense of pride in in his part, but also in my dad's part, which is really cool.
Is there a bit of that spirit of his still around?
Definitely. I think a lot of it is foundational in our culture. I think a lot of it, I hear a lot of people who, I knew him as a grandfather. I knew him in a very specific lens. A lot of people, including still in the business today, that worked with him, knew him as a business owner and as a younger man that was, a little bit more intense and a little bit more of to use a word a good friend uses, he was a force to be reckoned with.
Okay.
He was a serious dude that you don't mess with.
Because you came back into the business formally 4 years ago, 5 years
Almost
ago?
4.
Almost 4 years ago. So
Formally.
So, those last 2 years of his life that overlap there, he wasn't. You never truly saw him within the business. You probably saw him growing up as the business leader alongside your dad, or that patriarch of the business. But you never sat across from him in a boardroom meeting when you guys were having difficult conversations around a complex issue.
Correct. And I think that changes my perspective on. I think I have an interesting perspective in that, because it changes my perspective, because a lot of my perspective of who he is as a business owner is whatever stuck around. Right? And so you ask that question, is he still around? And what I see is what stuck around. And a lot of that is in our culture. You have, usually with founders that are successful and have a good culture, you have culture by osmosis, right? The culture is what everybody sees and how they interact with the owner when you're small enough that everybody interacts with the owner. And so I tell people our culture today is way more defined. We've got a mission and core values, right? We've got, we call basics that are kind of the functional, how are we going to operate as employees of H&H? How are we going to serve one another? We have all of those things that are much more defined. My grandfather ran a culture because of who he was as a man and a person and a follower of God. Just forced to be reckoned with. Very strong man, very good man. Had his shortcomings. He was a very hard man. But he ran the business based off of who he was, because he didn't know any different. And so that created a foundation for our culture. I think one thing my dad has done really well in the last probably decade to 15 years is defining that culture. How do we turn that into what can be translated to what, we're at, 90-something employees now, 98 employees. How do you translate that to 98 employees? Because not all 98 employees can have the relationship with my dad that
he had with his employees.
15 to 20 or 30 had with my grandfather, right? And so how do you scale culture? I think my dad's done a really good job in continuing to build that foundation and define it. And it's really cool to be able to be back, and a lot of people say that I am much more, and I tend to agree, I'm much more of my grandfather than I am my father. And so it's very natural for me to jump in to our culture and say, yes, absolutely, this is who we are. Like, undoubtedly, unapologetically, this is who we are and how we're going to operate, and this is our non-negotiables as a business of what we're going to put as the most important. And so it's a lot of fun being like my grandfather. I think knowing him in the perspective that I knew, I think that it also shields me against some of his downfalls, as I hear those stories too. But I didn't see that in him largely as a grandfather later in his life as I was a kid. So
I would imagine that there was probably some, I don't know the right term here, but some times where that line between father and son got blurred between your grandfather and your dad, and they had to have that difficult conversation and then sit across from each other at Thanksgiving. How have you guys navigated that as a family? Because 90 employees, the scale that you guys are operating at, like the problems that come up for you guys are not the problems I saw in my small business with 9 employees. It's very different.
That's the hardest part of family business, is that you are a family in a business. And I think everybody needs to figure out what works for them, right? I think what we determine that works for us is that there's a healthy blurred line, right? It's not, we go to, my dad and I, we go to family dinner. Something work comes up, we talk about it, but like, we also know that we can leave it there and pick it up, Monday, or we can pick it up the next day. But it's not a stressor to us because we love what we do. That's the other part of it. And but my dad and my grandfather was a much more difficult transition. There are still employees in the business today that were around during that transition. It was not an easy one. It was a difficult one. Again, my grandfather, this is the baby. This is his baby, right? He has a sense of pride over it. And as it grew, the only way that he knew to manage it was to hold on to it. And it's just kind of that, knowing how to be an entrepreneur to get it thriving versus being able to get it scaling. He kind of reached his limit on what he was able to do, which is, my dad took over at the right time and was able to do a great job in getting that to the next level. But yeah, I've heard many stories of really, between my dad and my grandfather, the business relationship threatened the father-son way more than it should have. And I have to give a lot of credit to my dad for certain times throughout that, and I can tell specific stories, but maybe you can have him on to tell those stories in better detail. But he had to stand up to one of the most powerful men in his life and say something. And that's hard. We got together with a group of guys last night. We were talking about strong men. And we're talking about how in today's society you need to be a strong man, and you need to balance that with being a tender man to be open to things like your son coming to you in a time of need. And his generation, that wasn't popular. My granddad's generation. So a lot of credit to my dad there. And then, he and I have our things, but our things are all in an effort to balance it out. And he and I know at the end of the day, if this, I don't care how big this is, I don't care how profitable it is, I don't care any of that. If it's going to threaten our relationship, we'll sell it. Forget about it, right? Our relationship comes first, and we've been able to manage that in a fantastic way. Some hard conversations, some much easier conversations, a lot of fun conversations. When I always looked up to my dad growing up, so getting to work for him and work with him is a cool thing. But that's the hardest part of family business, is family in the business. Because when you're, somebody told me this one time as a piece of advice, you've got to put your work hat on when you're at work, you got to put your family hat on when you're at home. But when it's the same hat, right, it's a little trickier to navigate. And what I've learned, and I think it comes back to there's a lot of conversation today, and I think healthily so, between work-life balance. When you're an entrepreneur, work-life balance is work and life together.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to make time for your family. You need to make time for your wife, but it's not a formulaic, this hour in my calendar is for my family, this hour in my calendar is for my work. If you love what you do, and as an entrepreneur, I hope that you do, if you love what you do, it should be a whole lot easier and less stressful. Not that it doesn't have an impact on your family, but you have to balance out that scale to just, it's not a formulaic way. There's a lot of blurred lines, and I think that's healthy. Now, don't go working, 100, 120 hours and forget, not seeing your family, right? Don't see your family once or twice a week. Like, be a good steward of what you have in business and family and life and personal and church and relationship with God, all of it together. But you should be one person, of which all of those are pieces, not events on your calendar.
You used the word steward there, and I was hoping that you would during this conversation. You're technically the fourth generation, right? But third,
Sure. Call it third for sake of confusion.
Yeah, for the formality of.
Well, my great grandmother
business.
was also in the business too, so that's a real family business.
So, do you see yourself as the steward for the next phase? I mean, your dad's got plenty of time left, right?
Yeah.
And you guys have from in the time that I've known you, you've mentioned some of the difficult conversations, but I think you guys have excelled because you're trying to make it better. You're not trying to put down what your dad has done, right? Because obviously it's worked. You're trying to take it to that next level and kind of introduce your own ideas. So I guess, how do you reconcile that next level of stewardship, right? And Jimmy, you're a young guy, but you've done a great job since you've gotten here. How do you reconcile that? Do you see yourself as a steward for the next 50 years?
I definitely do, right? There's this concept of how far out is your horizon, right? And as a leader of the business, your horizon needs to be the furthest out. You need to be able to see the vision for the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years of the business. And being young and coming back into the business, coming into what has been my dream for so long, gives me the circumstances to have a 50-year horizon, to be able to want to see what is in the next 50 years. Somebody gave me some good advice here probably close to 2 years ago now, that I have an interesting, and we've grown a lot in the last few years that's forced us to change some things. And so to come into the new generation, but somebody gave me some good advice. They're like, my job and my responsibility, I see very clearly as stewarding the future, which is, that just comes naturally to me. Vision comes naturally to me. If you ask me to, what does this look like in 50 years? Like, by no means do I have details, but like I can kind of see a direction. It's hard to put into words, and that's a challenge that I have. But I can see it. I can see the vision ahead. But the challenge that I have is honoring the past at the same time of stewarding the future. Because there are still people in the business that have been here 20, 25 years that have seen the business go through a ton of change and worked with, all three generations now, that, knew my granddad closer to his, the end of his prime, that knew the man that he was and what that impact was on the business. And so I think stewarding the business comes with the responsibility of any entrepreneur or family business that's healthy. I think that stewardship it comes naturally to me. It's a stewardship of the business, for the sake of our purpose and our mission, which is to serve. But the challenge that I had, and I think is a proper one, is how do you honor the past at the same time? Sometimes we can get looking so far ahead, we forget where we came from, and that where we came from is honoring the people that have put in years and decades of work to be where we are today. And hearing them. And yeah, that means, somebody that's been here 20, 25 years is going to have a little bit more old school than new school, or than the new school people will have, right? I don't know what we did 20 years ago. I was a kid, right? But we've got to honor that. And then, honoring all the way back to our foundation, our culture, who my grandfather was, that built our culture, that made us special, that gave us a foundation, that made us something that somehow in the eyes of God that we were worth growing. So you have to steward the future as well as steward the past, and you have to find that balance. And I think if you steward the past, it sets you up really, really well to be able to better steward the future.
So, is there anyone in the business that's been around longer than you've been alive, besides your dad?
Ooh, definitely my dad. I think we might have one or two people in the business that probably started. It's close. It's
Okay.
close. I'd have to ask them.
So I asked that question to transition to my Nepo baby question from earlier. You obviously came back into the business 4 years ago, so you were well into your mid-20s at this point. You didn't just graduate college and just come in as the VP of operations. Like, the way that I've kind of seen your story, and I'd love for you to correct me on this, but I feel like your dad and your family was kind of like, go get some real experience.
Yeah, it kicked me out.
Yeah. So you go to school for business and
Accounting.
accounting. I was going to say economics, but that's broader. So what'd you go and do out of college when Dad didn't call you and offer you the board seat?
Yeah, right. I got a small $1 million loan from. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, and he and I talked about this since high school, right? And I think that's the other part of what makes my dad and I relationship healthy as well in a family business is we've been talking about this for decades, even back to when I was a kid, right? I haven't been alive that many decades, but we've been talking about this for so long. So even going back to high school, I can remember he's like, work somewhere else. My granddad did it with my dad. He kicked him out, make him go work a job for a year and a half. So out of college, my dad challenged me. He said, he gave me a few challenges. I don't know if he defined it like this, but this is what I heard. Go work somewhere else. Number one, find out if you love it. Because if you find something else that you love, don't come back.
Wow.
Like, no pressure, no grooming, no come back into the business because it's a family, because it's got to be. It was, you've got to love it. And I see now, being in the business and being more mature, that needing to love what you do. If I found something else that I loved, it wouldn't have made me love what I do today. And if I don't love what I do today, I'm not fit to lead the company, to lead the business, to lead my teams that I have today. So he said, go find something you love. If you find it, stick with it. If you don't find it, then we leave the option open and coming back. So number two is to learn to work for somebody else. When I came back into the business, my first boss was my dad, right? So go learn to work for a different boss, because that right there, I think it's one of the biggest challenges and you can see us from the leader side and from the associate side, but that's one of the biggest challenges our generation has today is learning how to work for a boss, a good boss or a bad boss. So he's like, go have that experience. Go figure that out. Go learn how to deal with conflict when you don't see eye to eye with the person that's managing you. Go learn how to negotiate for a raise. Go learn how to fight for a promotion. That was the third thing. He said, find out a way to be successful or get promoted. And because if you don't learn how to excel in some other type of work, that process of learning how to excel and succeed and determine to do your job better than you did yesterday is a process and a learning and a skill that is non-negotiable for family coming back in the business, for me to come back into the business and be able to exercise that here. Because when you're family coming into the business, you got a target on your back. And I think that our culture and our people didn't see it that way, but you have a lot higher responsibility. our VP commercial development, Emily, she's been here 20 years. She told me the other day, she goes, it's a lot different when your last name is Hartley, right? There's just a higher pressure with everything, and it should be. I think it should be in any family business, and I have a pride around the second, third, and the children's generation coming up in the business and the pride they need to work with. So he told me, he said, see if you find something you love, learn to work for somebody else, and learn how to be successful or get promoted. So out of college, I worked for the forklift warehouse equipment company for 2 years. Of course, I started in summer of 2019. So we all know what happened in 2020. That was a lot of fun. Learned a ton. Learned how to go through a pandemic. Learned how to have hard conversations with customers, with bosses, with peers, because we were all fighting a fight way bigger than ourselves in the supply chain impacts of COVID and all sorts of different things going on. So that 2 years experience was golden, looking back. And then, like I said, getting to go, and yes, I was selling, but I was solution selling. So going into operations and trying to know what questions to ask about their operations to learn, but then also know what questions to ask to see if anything that I had that I could offer could help them solve solutions or solve anything. So I did that for 2 years. I enjoyed it. I love it. But I didn't enjoy the organization that I worked for as much. It was a much bigger organization, a little bit more corporate structure. And the supply chain and the economy just made it really, really difficult when you're based on commission sales.
Yep.
But in that, I was able to go from a lead generator, calling, and just my knuckles hurt from knocking. I mean, you're trying to drum up business everywhere you get. I remember my manager going with me on a follow-up visit to a customer to present a quote, and he looks at where we're at, and he's like, there's people here? I'm like, yeah, I am everywhere that we need to go. I'm drumming up business. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it looks shut down. I see a dock door. I'm going to see if I can sell a pallet jack. Kind of. So I was hustling, which is cool.
Knuckles hurt from knocking.
Knuckles hurt from knocking.
The Jimmy Hartley story.
Hartley.
That might be a straight to movie or straight to DVD movie, but
yeah, there we go.
I'd watch it.
Just find it on Blu-ray. Blu-ray still around? It is still around. It's got to be. So that got me promoted into like a full account manager role, where it was much more commission based. And then with where the economy was, our lead times got crazy long. We didn't get paid commission until our lead times. And I knew my path. I'd already known. I said, I know that I'm not going to be here forever. I know this isn't something that I love. I was like, so then therefore my path is, H&H. But I didn't feel like it was time. I was in North Carolina at the time too. I just graduated college, stayed around the area, so I stuck around. I'd also met who would become my wife, and so she was living in North Carolina. So life things meant I'm not moving to Florida. But work was like, well, I've kind of checked the boxes. I was like, you know what, let me go work. This is a really big company. This is kind of a corporate structure. Let me go work for a smaller company and see what that's like. So then I was a project manager for a signage company out of right near the North Carolina-South Carolina border. Great company. And it was interesting because that was very similar size to H&H Products, very similar path. They grew very quickly. Yeah, and I was a project manager, so my responsibility was working with the client with what they wanted for their signage. Working then with each department, whether it's our purchasing department or our pricing team or design team, to just see the project all the way through until it got manufactured and installed. So I got to see more of the operations side of the business, even though I was client facing. I got to see the operations and how that impacted the client and work very closely with those teams. And it was a smaller company, so I'm out walking the production floor. I knew everybody out there, got to form relationships there. And then so that was a lot of fun, and I had kind of your fun accounts. I'll tell you who they were afterwards if I haven't before, but I had the accounts that were like, this is the cool factor accounts.
Oh.
But they were very difficult to work with, to say, because they're big accounts. There's a lot of levels. There's a lot of approvals. There's a lot of different things. But that was such a cool experience, being able to go through that. So leading up to that, I was about to get, married to now my wife, Alex.
Shout out Alex.
Shout out Alex. She's awesome. She's awesome. We, so we're about to get married, and I look up, and I'm doing, classic small business. Almost, they had a saying around there that we're a 50-year-old startup, because they were growing, and so much of their culture and growth was so similar to a startup, because they were just hustling. And I was like, I love that. That's me, right? So on paper, I should love this. I'm hustling. I am a part of something bigger than myself. This company is growing, and I am I thought I had times where I had gotten burnt out at my first job, and this was way worse. And it was less than a year, and so I'm sitting here, I'm like, what is going on? I'm looking back at my checklist and looking at number one, do you love it? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't figure out what it was, couldn't figure out why, I couldn't put a definition to it, which frustrated my type A self. And I was like, I don't love this. I should, circumstantially, on paper, but I don't. And so, again, shout out to my wife, Alex. We get married in April of 22. I'm having conversations before we're getting married, like, hey, by the way, I think I'm gonna quit my job. She's like, okay. She was a nurse at the time, so we wouldn't have been without income. She was going through her own challenges in her career, being a nurse in the ER during pandemic time. And I was like, I don't know what that means for our income, but I know in the next few months, within 6 months of being married, we're going to be moving to Florida. I feel God's call. I feel like this is the right time. There were things going on in the business here that made sense for me to come back. There were spaces and positions and opportunities for me to learn and also serve in the business, not just be a Nepo baby. And she was like, okay, I'll follow you. I'll trust you. We'd always talked about it. She always said she always wanted to live in Florida. She loves it. She loves the warmth and the weather. And she was just supportive from the get-go. And she, so I quit my job, gave my 4 weeks notice, because I always like to outdo everybody. So instead of 2, I gave 4. I don't know. I like that. I'm competitive. Even in my
exits.
notice, even my exits. Which I got one of the best compliments leaving that company, actually. I looked up at the end of 4 weeks, and the COO at the time looked at me, and just like this weird look on his face. I was like, hey, what's going on? You're okay? He goes, I just don't get it. I was like, what? He goes, I've never seen anybody put in their notice and double down on their work and do better work and try to get things done. It was just a cool compliment. But again, that was the hustler that I was. That was the, like, on paper, this should make sense. But it didn't. So in between transition, I get married. In between transition, worked at a nonprofit, Beds for Kids. Shout out Beds for Kids. Good buddy Zach Smith over there runs the operations. Amazing organization, nonprofit organization helping families furnish their homes and apartments when they can't afford to, and coming alongside them and serving them in that capacity. So for 2 months, I delivered furniture to families in need and prayed with them. One of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. But it was just such a reset point. And then it allowed me to be able to hear God's calling and go, yeah, it's time, right? It wasn't, the audible, mystic thing that we see, may see in movies or think about, but it was just a tug on my heart. It was like, it's time. And Alex was like, okay, awesome. And it was perfect because she was starting to, have some difficulties with her job. She needed a reset too, and we moved down here. And then on the H&H side, the few months leading up to me coming back to H&H was several different plans of how to come back to H&H. And then at the end of it was just like, we had some things in our operations staff going on. My dad was just doing a lot and that president of the company shouldn't be doing. And I was like, let me fill the gap. Let me do some of those things. I was started off scheduling production from North Carolina, which is when the operations in Orlando is not the easiest thing in the world. After a couple of months of that coming down, he, kind of reset some of the operations staff. He's like, well, I've got a gap. And he's like, that gap is the plant manager. You want to run the plant. Now, I'm a competitor. I'm a hustler. I want to succeed, right? Yeah. And achieve and accomplish, especially for the sake of others around me. I wanna be able to help others. But I never managed anybody, let alone multiple teams. I never managed an operation. I've never done any of this. But my dad's message wasn't, and during the time we're growing in 2022 when I came in, we grew 50% as a company in 1 year. And that's a whole story in itself, how we grew out of COVID.
I'll ask him that one.
And it wasn't okay, I've groomed this position for you, here you go, here's this position.
Don't let it fall apart.
Yeah, don't let it fall apart. It's in pieces, I need help putting it back together. Yeah. And he makes the comment, and this is another interesting thing about family business, he's like, it's hard sometimes because he's got a lot of experience with a lot of other people in the business. He's got 29 years of experience knowing me. And that's hard to balance, because in a profession that doesn't, 4 years is the experience, but he knows me so much more and deeper than that. And so that's where he was like, if he looked at my resume, he would have been silly to hire me. Absolutely silly. But he was like, I know that you can come in and be a benefit here, and was able to, through the grace of God and a lot of difficulty, a lot of long days, a lot of stressful nights, a lot of early mornings and 4 a.m. phone calls with the plant and crazy stuff, we built out a structure to where we are today, to where now I can say today, it's a whole lot more fun, but it's a whole lot more fun because we can keep going.
Yeah.
We've got a structure to keep going, which is awesome.
So do you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
It's funny.
I feel like it's such a hot topic of a word. Anyone can say they're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And for you, I'll give you my opinion in a minute, but like, you didn't start this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You went and worked for a couple jobs before, but do you see yourself as an entrepreneur?
So this is funny. My buddy and I in California, shout out Connor. He and I, ever since college, so like we realized we have known each other probably close to 12 years. And he and I, for these 12 years, have had this conversation of, or is he and am I, because he has his own career and professional pursuits and service and ministry pursuits as well. Are we entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, right? And the definition, the primary difference between that, and you can look up the definitions, and different people have different definitions, is your entrepreneur is willing to risk it all to get it going. And your intrapreneur is much better at coming into something existing and using the entrepreneurial spirit to continue the path. So circumstantially, I consider myself an intrapreneur, but that entrepreneurial spirit, I think a lot of people love the title of entrepreneur. I think a lot of people love the title of manager, director, VP, president, owner, all of these hot button titles. I was like, the title we should be worried about is, if you're a business owner, is entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit. Like we got to have that. You got to be able to, and entrepreneur has its own sense of risk as well, but you got to be able to risk a lot for the sake of the business. Yeah. I had a vendor say something. This is I think a major, it's a major compliment to my dad, is at a vendor we've been working with for decades. And we went to lunch with him a few weeks ago, and he's like, I know that if it's your last dollar, talking to my dad, if it is Morris Hartley's last dollar and he has people to pay, he's paying that dollar. He's not keeping it for himself. And I was like, that's such a compliment, but that right there is the entrepreneur. That right there is entrepreneurial spirit. Is that at the end of the day, your service is something bigger than yourself, to be able to give your last dollar if that's what you got. And it's not going to yourself.
Yeah, it's willing to bet on yourself.
Yeah.
And I think I would call you an entrepreneur, even with the definition you gave, because you are betting on the next 50 years of your life of being successful in this company, right? You're a young guy. I mean, you lived 80, 90 years old. Like, you got another 50, 60 years that you got to stand on what you've built here, right? And what you're building on top of what have been built before you. You mentioned about serving something bigger than yourself. And so there's two questions here. And the first one I actually want to turn a little attention to Alex and your mom and your grandmother and apparently your great grandmother. I didn't know that part of the story.
Yeah.
How have the women that have been supporting the men of the Hartley family in this family enterprise shaped the organization and who it is?
Foundational. I mean, that's the word that comes to mind. One of our best-selling brands it's here on the table, is Betty Jean's Lemonade. Betty Jean is my grandmother, my granddad's wife. And that was actually my dad's decision, starting that brand, saying, this is to honor, it was in 2016, this is to honor the woman that made it possible. And, I think as business owners or as, executives and leaders, we work in a world of numbers and metrics and achievement factors. We can look at a business that's at X sales yesterday and Y sales tomorrow and see if that's better or worse. Those women who support the men in their by providing for the families and serving in their role in that family, they don't have a metric. And so I think if you're that type A business person, like you can look at some metrics to determine quote unquote success. And I think that's one of the greatest. That's what makes those women so humbling. Is my grandmother, my mom, my wife. They don't have a number to look at and go, oh, okay, well, here's this number. This number got better. I'm doing a great job supporting our family. They just serve without expectation of return of service. And in such a, it can be in the background, but if it doesn't exist, none of this exists. If my Nana didn't do what she did or my mom didn't serve in the way she did, this doesn't exist. It just doesn't. That's a non-negotiable fact. The business would have been sold, would have gone under, would have whatever. And so it's a major shout out to the people who support us and who sacrifice with us. They may not be here. They're not in the trenches, but we go home and they help us reset. They help take care of the things in our life to allow us to have that blurred line work-life balance. And I think there's a challenge to the men too, to make sure like your responsibility is also outside of your business. Your responsibility is to go serve your wife as Christ loved the church, is what Scripture tells us. It is to go love your family as well. And it's a two-way street. But yeah, no, this wouldn't exist without the women serving without asking for anything in return. To this day, my Nana doesn't ask for anything in return. She's one of the most humble people that I know. And she is just, there's such a sense of contentment that I can't even describe, that's so powerful.
I asked the question earlier when we were setting up if it's weird to have your name on these products, right? Like I'm looking at some Hartley pancake and waffle syrup here on the table, which, quick aside, when I was doing research for this, even though I've known you for a year and a half now, I was like, man, I've ingested your products and I didn't even realize it from, travels and whatnot. But my question is actually to how do you think Alex would answer this? And did you guys have conversations about what the future first lady of H&H Products looks like? Was she prepared to, like, there's 90 employees that look up to this family that I'm marrying into, and yes, I'm a wife and one day a mom, and shout out for her to holding down the house with two close
two
to
under
close,
two?
two under two little ones. I mean, did you guys have that conversation before you got married?
Yes, we did.
You hesitated there a little bit.
I hesitated because, and I think you say first lady of H&H. I think it's a funny way of looking at it. I don't think we did in detail because I don't think either one of us knew what that detail would be. Right? It's not going to say, hey, here's the 10 lines of responsibility or the 10 details or changes in our life that'll happen as a result. But we talked about it as a calling, is how our conversation was phrased. And we don't know what the details of that calling look like. We don't know, especially at the time coming in and just like, hey, there's a bunch of pieces and I need help gluing them back together. I didn't know what the next position or title was, or I didn't know what the next problem to solve was, my next learning lesson. But with Alex, she just was, this is a calling to serve. This is to serve the business, and my granddad, because of the culture of who he was, served his people. Right, his employees were everything. His customers were secondary to his employees because his employees helped serve the customers. And that culture of just serving people, I was like, this is a calling. I was like, I don't know what this looks like, but you're a part of this. And Alex just is so. She is so calm and wise. More than she realizes. She's going to see this and she's like, I'm not wise. No. She absolutely has such observational wisdom to look at and say, hey, just to either call things out or to I'll run work ideas by her, and she's like, well, have you thought of this? And I'm like, yeah, that makes that solves the problem.
That's the answer I'm looking for.
I've been struggling with this all week, and in 15 minutes you solved my problem, so thank you. But she I think she sees it as a calling too, and the calling for her to serve in our family. She understands that a direct impact of that is being able to serve here at work as well, in addition to family. I think that's an interesting conversation that enough time has passed. I can have that with her again, because I think that's a different conversation today.
Yeah.
In a good way. We just have a little bit more detail now.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up here, I have a few rapid fire questions, and I have one that I've been thinking about for weeks leading up to this that I wanted to ask you. That I know what your answer is going to be, but I want us to close on that high. So, books, podcasts, things that you recommend to the owner operator out there, someone with that entrepreneurial spirit, that you would recommend that they digest, take home, think about.
Absolutely. So what I think really started adding definition to my leadership, this is in college when I discovered Simon Sinek, who's very popular author. He calls himself an optimist, which I love that title. Speaker, and he has two books primarily that were golden. I highly recommend. It's shorter to go watch the YouTube video. Highly recommend watching the talks. Start with why. Mm-hmm. Understand that purpose starts everything, and then leaders eat last. I think two great concepts. He's got books or talks you can find on YouTube or wherever. On the books are great too, and highly recommend that. A couple books read recently. I think one's kind of an old school book, Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Okay, great book.
Great book, great concept. I think Good to Great is a great concept when you start having more people around you, and you got to figure out, how do I help? When you get to the point as an entrepreneur where you have to realize, my job is not just being a leader, my job is to grow other leaders. And how do I grow other leaders to become a great business? Good to Great's a great resource. And then I would say the last one, and this changed my perspective on serving our people through the management side of leadership, is No Ego by Cy Wakeman.
Okay, I haven't heard that one.
That's a great read. Kind of flips the lid on traditional, I would argue maybe more corporate style management, on the open door policy. Oh, it sounds great on the surface, but really, what that's creating is inefficiency in your employees and yourself. Or things like you don't want a culture of people who fill out a survey with good responses. You want a culture of accountability. What's the difference? So really, really good stuff. Again, both those books are great when you start having a team around you, and you got to figure out, okay, because a lot of entrepreneurs start off with a great idea, and then they start getting other people around them. They go, uh-oh, I got to be a leader. And then when you start getting to the level of uh-oh, I got to start building other leaders. Those are some great resources.
Why H&H Products? Why you guys?
Why us? This just came to mind. It's gonna be so cool one day, standing before God and asking that question: why did He favor us? Just a cool thought. We serve. Our mission statement is to serve with excellence, innovation, quality, and integrity. Our core values being those: service, excellence, innovation, quality, integrity. There are not a lot, and I actually would say that there's probably more, which is a great move in the marketplace. Great thing happening is your mission starts with to serve in service. That's our why. Our why is to serve our people, our partners, as our vendors, our suppliers, and our customers. We're not starting with serving ourselves, and we imitate that from the servant leadership of Jesus that we see in the scriptures. And I think that greater purpose drives us to greater excellence. It doesn't mean we're perfect today, but it means that we're getting better every day. We have a mantra. Shout out Lindsay, our director of quality and regulatory. She coined this a few years ago and has made it all the way into our definition of innovation in our core values is hashtag continuous improvement. Everything we do is to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. And for the sake, that's the how. The why is to serve our people, our vendors, our customers better. So why H&H? Partner with us to help serve others.
And my last question to kind of wrap this up. And I've stayed away from this question during the course of our conversation because I know that we could talk for hours on this topic alone. But what and who do you serve, Jimmy? As a person, as an individual, what and who do you serve?
Jesus Christ. Everything. I look around. I asked that question before. I was like, it would be so cool to ask that God that question one day. Serve Jesus Christ. He's my Savior, right? And there is the element of salvation that Scripture tells us that says that we have fallen short of God's standard, and therefore we need to be saved. And then God offered His Son Jesus to save us, to be able to. There's two elements of that. There's the eternal element, to be able to save us so that we may be in the kingdom of heaven in the presence of God one day, which is amazing. And that is a miracle, and that is the gift of Jesus on the cross to take the punishment for our breaking of God's standard. But the other part, and I think that is God's favor upon us in this life, which, by the way, isn't worldly success. Not always. It can be, right? You look around, our business is succeeding. You can look at that in a worldly definition and say, yeah, we're successful. Awesome. Great. Sweet. But am I successful in the eyes of God? Am I successful in the perspective of growing the kingdom of God? Right? That's who we serve ultimately. If our end does not result in the glorification and service of God, we've missed the mark. So it just raises us to a higher standard and perspective, right? Everything starts off with the truth and the provision of God and ends with us glorifying and serving Him. I think the throughput of that, when you look at it, is our service of our people. Like I said, our people, our vendors, our customers, professionally, personally, my family, Alex, Oliver, Leo, friends, you, Taylor, shout out Evan and Paige, shout out some other cool friends that we got, Davis, Riley, right? Some cool people that we have in our circle. I want to be available to serve them as well. But ultimately, if I serve any of those people and I do not connect it to the greater service of the kingdom of God, I have fallen short in my perspective of what we're attaining towards.
Well, man, I'm so grateful for you as a friend. I'm thankful for God bringing you and Alex into my life. You set a standard for what it means to be a good friend, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I'm not here ever in the warehouse or at the plant, but there's that idea of like being the same person in every single room that you're in, and I know that that's you, and I know that that comes from a culture that was built before you, right? You didn't just spin that up on your own, right? It was between your mom and your dad, your grandparents, great grandparents, like all of that has a generational effect. I think the standard of servant leadership is very apparent in the Hartley family and in the Hartley H&H products. And um, I'm so grateful to be alongside this journey with you to see where the next 50 years of H&H goes. Maybe it has to be H when, you know, Oliver or Leo earns their H, but
I got to earn mine.
that's true. That's true. But I am grateful for you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for talking about yourself and your family's history. And that's it, man. That's the pod.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me. Blessed to know you as a friend, your family. Blessed to be a part of your life.